How deep in trouble is this Royals bullpen heading into the month of June? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about the show and maybe more so about me, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some hosting, some co-hosting, and some producing as well, so I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. We'll have plenty more coming up on them in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. But they're going to have you covered on a lot of different household items. When you're trying to fix stuff around your house, SupplyHouse is going to have you covered. But again, more on them coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Questions and comments can always be left to me on YouTube or on Twitter. I'll try my best to get to them, even though this week is a little bit different, a little bit unique. As you probably can tell, we are episode 3 of the week. We're not with our typical camera or typical audio. That's because my computer is being repaired. That's not going to be figured out or finished up before the end of this week. Tomorrow, kind of a fun little show. It's not going to be a Mailbag Friday. We're going to push back Mailbag Friday to Saturday. So it'll be a Mailbag Saturday. We'll still be able to get to that because I didn't have a show on Monday. But we're going to have a series preview with Locked On Padres for the Royals and Padres series coming up. I'm going to be out there tomorrow night, so I'll be sure to give a full breakdown on what's been going on, what's happening during that game, and hopefully a big crowd for the Big Slick tournament or the Big Slick softball game. Should be pretty fun and a good, lively crowd as the Royals return home to Kauffman Stadium after losing the finale in Minnesota today. Oof. That is a gut punch. I think everybody knew I was going to lead off this podcast episode talking about the bullpen, and rightfully so, to be honest with you. We have discussed this bullpen in length before. We have gone over the highs of this bullpen. We have gone over the lows. We have gone over minor league options that are good fits for the bullpen. And at this point, I'm almost fully convinced the Royals are going to try to upgrade that bullpen either in June or at the deadline. I am fully convinced at this point because right now, this bullpen is not good enough. This bullpen's not good enough to get them into the playoffs. This bullpen can't get them to October. I'm sorry to say that this group, as good as they've been, and a stat I put out there on Twitter, again, you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. A stat I put out there was that this is only the second team in franchise history to have a record 10 games over 500 or more, and it's existed. Only the second team. The other one being 2015, and this group has the best record entering the month of June in franchise history. I might have said July earlier. I meant June. Even the team that won 102, the 1977 Royals, I believe it was, they had a losing record entering June, actually. So only 2 teams have entered the month of June with a record of 10 games over 500 or more, for that matter. And the Royals, no matter what happens tomorrow, will either be 13 games over 500 or 11 games over 500. They're not going to fall below that threshold. But man, you feel like this bullpen has prevented them from being so much better. And it's frustrating because I really did feel like this bullpen was going to be one of the better aspects of this team. I thought they had stabilized it a lot. And I don't want to overreact to one outing, but quite honestly, I think this bullpen's been shaky for a little bit of time now. Really, ever since James McArthur blew that save against Texas, going back to that Sunday game, the last spot start for Daniel Lynch, in fact, Since that point, the bullpen's kind of torpedoed a little bit. And I could actually say that Texas series, because the Saturday game, the Royals gave up 15 runs, which I believe is a season high still. My biggest issue with this bullpen, and I think it's quite obvious, there's just not enough swing and miss in that bullpen. There's not enough power in that bullpen. They are fine, at least good enough, and actually, I'll take that back, not good enough. They're just treading water, ERA-wise. They're about 17th, 18th in the league. You just kind of shrug your shoulders and go, it's not good at all, but it's also not awful. It's not abysmal. But you look at some of the other stats, WHIP, they're bottom 5 in the league. Strikeouts, they're dead last, and they're dead last by a wide margin. I think even in today's game, you can figure out that the strikeout issues were very apparent. The Royals had a 4-0 lead, and really it was just Chris Stratton that blew this game. And it was sloppy defense as well. If Chris Stratton would have gotten out of that inning and not given up 4 runs in that inning, if it wasn't for the implosion, I would have been able to pinpoint in that inning the ball that Bobby Witt Jr. got should have been a pocket ball. He shouldn't have thrown it. And that moved, I think it was Willie Castro up to second base, and then Max Kepler bloops one into left field. You know, if Bobby Witt Jr. pockets that ball, and again, you live and die with that because Bobby Witt Jr. is so good defensively at shortstop. But when that ball rolled out to him, I thought it should have been a pocket ball. And if he holds on to that, well, Max Kepler's single just moves Castro to second. He's not getting to third because the ball one-hopped MJ Melendez. And then there was a strikeout of Christian Vasquez, and now you got 2 outs and you still have a 1-run lead. Whereas the air moved Castro up to second, and then Kepler blooped one into left, tie game, totally different story, totally different approach of how you're going to get out of that inning. But Chris Stratton just doesn't have the swing and miss, all right? Angel Serpa, as good as he's been, doesn't have the swing and miss. John Schreiber, as good as he's been, doesn't have the swing and miss. James MacArthur, I think he's been up and down a little bit. He's got the best pure stuff in the bullpen, for my opinion. And I don't think it's good enough to have that swing and miss. Carlos Hernandez, option to Omaha today. 100+ mile an hour fastball, no swing and miss whatsoever. You go to Nick Anderson, you go to Will Smith, you go to, who else am I missing in this bullpen? Sam Long now. There's not enough swing and miss. And that is problematic because you go to some scenarios in games where it's runner at third, 1 out, runners at second and third, and 1 out or 2 out. The Royals are basically hoping for soft contact or a routine play where they can get the out. Where you look at Minnesota's bullpen, Jorge Alcala, Griffin Jacks, Johan Duran. And Duran wasn't good against the Royals, but he throws a 98-mile-an-hour splitter. He's getting the swing and miss. Right? When you've got that type of firepower, you can have those shutdown innings. It's not about, just inducing soft contact. Because there's going to be outings like Chris Stratton's today where he's not in the zone. He's nibbling. And when you're nibbling and you throw 90 to 93, it's not going to bode well for you in the field. And Chris Stratton's had a couple of these outings where he's nibbling. I remember the one in New York. I remember the one in Detroit. And I remember the one today. Just nibbling. And there was a missed strike call in that at bat. And I have always come down on umpires for taking the game out of the player's control. But Chris Stratton was all over the place. That's a tale as old as time in baseball, the little league to the big leagues. If you're all over the place, they're not going to reward you with a pitch like that. They're not going to. I'm sorry. And I will try to be the apologist for the players more times than not. But today I can't. Chris Stratton's walking too many guys when in his career he doesn't walk many. That has to be figured out. And this bullpen has to be figured out going into this month of June when they face Cleveland, when they face Seattle, when they face New York. when they face the Dodgers. You can't just hope for soft contact with those lineups. You can't. You have to have the swing and miss. And the Royals may be good enough to have a winning record with a below average bullpen, but this was an aspect of their team that was supposed to be pretty good, was supposed to stabilize. And honestly, none of the guys they brought in have really excited me. Not for the bullpen, at least. Schreiber, of course, through trade, but Will Smith, Nick Anderson, Chris Stratton, kind of a thumbs down at this point. They could get better. They could be that streaky bullpen as we've talked about before. But in all honesty, if the strikeouts don't start piling up, which right now they're not going to, we've discussed that on an episode before, you might have to look externally. You might need to look in the minors with Walter Pennington and Will Klein and John McMillan. You got to start finding guys who can get the swing and miss, because some of these guys ain't going to be able to cut it out in the bullpen. We are going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's take a breath. Okay, I saw a lot of reactions on Twitter today about this team, and I think this is a perfect time before this quick 3-game series of the Padres to just level everybody out. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And before we go any further, a couple of sponsors I want to give a shout out to, starting with SupplyHouse. Now, with SupplyHouse, get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trade, SupplyHouse.com. Now, SupplyHouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, h-vac, electrical, and more products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com. The SupplyHouse.com's free trade master program. Every trade master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. We also want to let you know about one of the local sponsors here, one of our brand new sponsors on the Locked On Royals channel, in PXG. Now, I went there and got my long-range driver fitted for me. It was a really cool walkthrough, about 40 minutes long. I believe it's only $25 to get that fitting. It can be short range, it can be long range, you could be driving, you could be putting. They fit it to you. It's a custom fitted thing, and you get to use the TrackMan, which is what I was told the pros use, so you can see your exit velocity, your swing speed, the distance on the ball, the spin rate, a lot of baseball terms we use, and it's so much fun to be out there. So a little bit more on PXG and the information that you can find there. They're located in Overland Park, and you can visit pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. That's 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen free golf balls. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals to schedule your fitting. That's pxg.com/LockedOnRoyals. Well, today I thought it was one of those perfect times to come back down to earth a little bit and talk some people off the ledge. I feel like a few times when taking over this podcast, more so this year than last year, I didn't need to talk anybody off the ledge last year, because by the time I took over this podcast, the team was completely buried. There wasn't much that you could get fired up and pumped up about. But this year, I think at times these are needed. And I think for a lot of folks out there, right after the game, which is, not always because of work, I'm able to do a podcast immediately after the game. I've been contemplating a little bit, the closer we get to October, if the Royals are really in contention, we might be doing live stream post-game shows. Like that will be our 30-minute episode, as we're just going to be coming to you live. There's not going to be any pre-recorded stuff where I can, ease my way through an episode where if I say something I don't really agree with, or, I'm going to leave the comments open, all of that. But that's way down the road here. But the reason I think that's a good idea is because a lot of the times the emotion's so raw in that moment that you want to overreact in the worst way possible, or you want to overreact in the best way possible. Listen, even though I cover this team, even though I do podcasts daily for this team, I would be lying to you if I said that I've been completely level-headed the entire year. I have had my moments of pure fan frustration. I have had my moments of overreacting. Believe me, I have done all of it. So I don't hold it against fans that, choose to, in that moment, and maybe it's just me being on Twitter. It's a place where stuff can always get crazy and chaotic. But sometimes I just have to leave the app. I'm going to be quite honest. I just have to close out the app and go do something else. On Memorial Day, I was grilling out. I was drinking a few beers. I was playing bags, cornhole, whatever you want to call it. And there was a couple different ways people like to call it. But I was out there having a good time. The Royals lost that game. Comments were going crazy. I said, don't need to be worried about that. Because for a lot of us out there, this season so far has been the dream season. If we were to go back in November and December, and I would have concocted the perfect start, I wouldn't have put them 12 games over 500. And it's not to be complacent after losses. It's not to just be okay with blowing 4-run leads and choking it away. It's not any of that. But it's also the understanding of that baseball is such a long season. And no matter how much you think they're going to the playoffs or how much you think they suck, in that moment, it's never the end-all be-all. Like, I get comments of, well, now they're exposed. Now they're terrible. Oh, they're never going to be good because of the bullpen. And I say, listen, until they show you they physically and emotionally cannot compete with this struggling bullpen, then there's no need to go there. I mean, I've tried to hammer in this point over and over again of the Royals are 35-23. They're only 58 games to the season, but it's over the 1/3 part of the season. For the last half decade, I have been begging for this team to be playing meaningful baseball in the summer. Keep people coming to Kauffman Stadium. Keep it entertaining. This was before I did this podcast. This was long before I did daily shows. This was before I worked in sports, at least for the professional teams here. This is before all of that. I just begged for a summer where it was fun and entertaining. And even with games like today, where you rip your hair out, you're pissed off, you still go, man, they've got a firm playoff spot right now. And yeah, they got to be able to beat the Minnesota Twins. But can I tell you this, for fans worried about the Twins, they don't see them again till mid-August. They're going to go 2.5 months before seeing the Minnesota Twins again. And there are only 2 more games in 2024 at Target Field. It's a 2-game series. They will see them in mid-August. Then they will see them again, I think, in September at Kauffman Stadium. They're not going to have to worry about playing Minnesota for quite some time. So if you're worried about the matchups, and that to me is the thing, because if we're going to talk about matchups, oh, they can't beat good teams. They should have swept Milwaukee, who's leading the National League Central. They could have taken the series, if not swept Baltimore at the beginning of the year. It's a playoff team. And I'm excited to see what they do against San Diego. I'm excited to see what they do against Cleveland for the first time. But see, to me, you don't want to overreact to divisional matchups too much anymore. It's important. They got to beat Cleveland and Minnesota because of head-to-head stuff and tiebreaker stuff. But they don't seem as much as they used to. They don't. They are seeing Cleveland for the first time in June. 2.5 months. Think about how much can change in 2.5 months. We're going to be in the final month and a half of the season the next time the Royals see the Twins, who I just, at this point, assume to be a bad matchup for the Royals. They expose a lot of the flaws the Royals have, and the Royals don't really expose a lot of their flaws out there. You can worry about what Minnesota is doing against other teams. But the deep breath part about this is that the Royals are still in a really good spot. That's the deep breath moment here. They have built a pretty soft cushion, and I mean soft in a good way here, in the wild card standings. They lead Minnesota by 3 games. They are up a lot of games on Boston. They are 3 games back of Cleveland, but with a good weekend, they take the series against San Diego. They're going to have a chance to gain some ground against Cleveland at Progressive Field coming up next week. If they don't, okay, it's still not panic time. Because as long as the Royals stay above 500, that's the benchmark for me. As long as you stay over 500, you're going to have a fighter's chance. You're going to have an opportunity to cause some chaos in September. Now, the Royals, I think, want to be one of those teams sitting pretty in September and not having to go on a stretch of 15 wins in 20 games. But again, look what the expectations were at the beginning of the year. On June 1st, those expectations will have been shattered. Either 13 games over 500 or 11 games. That's the deep breath part. Games like this today, unacceptable. You blew the game. You choked it away. That's frustrating against a division rival. But you turn the page. You don't see that team for 2.5 months. You don't. You don't need to worry about the matchups against Minnesota. They're going to be a completely different team, and you're going to be a completely different team by the next time you see them. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And for our final segment, we're going to tell you a little bit what's coming up tomorrow, what's coming up this weekend, and preview that series against the San Diego Padres. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And you can find us on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before our final segment, I want to tell you a little bit about FanDuel, one of our main sponsors on the show. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're an NBA fan or you're an NHL fan, again, FanDuel is the place to go to if you're going to place some money down on player props, if you're going to put money down on the spreads. I know that right now, as I'm recording this podcast, the Mavs are just hammering the Minnesota Timberwolves in the game. I blanked for a second thinking who they were playing. But I had some money down on Luka Doncic and the over with his points. That's looking very pretty right now. Tomorrow, if you're looking to bet, maybe you want to throw down some money on Michael Walker, who's been so good, on the over-under for his innings pitched, or maybe strikeouts if you're feeling a little bit. But do so over at FanDuel. Either create your account, or if you already have one, start winning some money today over at FanDuel. Well, tomorrow is going to be a little bit fun because we don't usually do this with other podcasts. We don't really usually do this with opponents that are upcoming, but we're going to have some fun tomorrow. We're not going to do a Mailbag Friday in tomorrow's episode. We're going to do that for Saturday. So if you're listening right now, you're wondering, when are the questions going to be flowing in? When is he going to send out the tweet? Wait till Friday night. Either Friday night or Saturday morning, because I'll be going to the game. I'll judge if I want to put it out before the game or if I want to wait till after the game for more content, stuff like that. But tomorrow, our episode is going to be with Locked On Padres, and we're going to get a little bit of a series preview. And we're going to get kind of a behind enemy lines look at the Padres and their season. And, I think it's a good time to do one of those series previews because it's going to count as one of our shows for the week. But I think it's going to be a good time because the Padres are not comparable to this Royals team, but their 2021 team is very comparable. They were that team that was ahead of schedule. They had really built a big lead, or at least were in playoff contention the first half of the year, and they bottomed out to close it out. They went 12-34, I believe, to close out the season. Now, if you're a Royals fan, fingers crossed, it doesn't get to that point where you just have the worst baseball of the season happen when it matters most. You're hoping that is not what it comes to. But tomorrow's show will be kind of fun with that. because there are ties between the Royals and the Padres. They've made some trades in the past. Eric Hosmer went from Kansas City to San Diego. I would love to get the thoughts on how they all remember Eric Hosmer. I know it's a lot different in the way the Royals fans remember Eric Hosmer. You talk about Edward Olivares and Trevor Rosenthal and Tim Hill and Franchi Cordero. You go up and down the list. Over the last couple of years, the Royals have made some trades with San Diego. Scott Barlow last year. I think it was Henry Williams that they were able to get in return of that. And then also another lottery ticket throw in. So the Royals and Padres like to do some business. And who knows? Maybe at the deadline this year, the Royals will try to go and get something in return from the San Diego Padres. But I love interleague matchups. I absolutely love it. I expect a massive crowd tomorrow. You have the Big Slick Celebrity Softball game happening. It's a Friday night. Hoping the rain holds off because it's going to be in the high 70s, low 80s. Perfect baseball weather to kick off the month of June. I know it'll be May 31st, but you get what I mean. It's going to be right there on the cusp of June. And you've got some great pitching matchups. Michael Wacha's facing his former team. Wish they would have had a chance to see Seth Lugo, but Lugo will actually throw in game one of that Cleveland series, which thumbs up for that. I think that's the perfect guy you want throwing in that Cleveland series. But you're going to get Wacha going up against Dylan Cease, who the Royals, the last time they faced Dylan Cease, have done really well. They have really put a hurt to Dylan Cease's ERA, more so when he's with the White Sox because they haven't seen him yet, of course, since pitching for the San Diego Padres. Then it's going to be Alec Marsh versus Joe Musgrove on Saturday night. And then on Sunday afternoon, we're going to get Cole Reagans going up against Michael King. This Padres team has the star power, has the talent. They right now, I think, either hold a playoff spot or at least a game out. I know they're chasing the San Francisco Giants in their own division. They're hovering right above 500. But it's a team that you can't really sleep on. And what's good for the Royals, they can't really overlook any of their opponents over the next 2 weeks. This 2-week stretch is going to be a lot of fun. I'll tell you that. It's going to be a lot of fun and a great test for this ball club. And I've been asked this question over and over again over the last, few days or so, probably 2 to 3 days. What's the goal for the end of June? I still will say just have a winning record. Have a winning record. You have a 12-game cushion to be over 500. And you're going to see this Padres team over 500. You'll see Cleveland, the division leader in the Central. You're going to see the Mariners, division leader in the AL West. You're going to see the Yankees, division leader in the AL East. And you're going to see the Dodgers, division leader in the NL West. I mean, that's about as difficult as it can be. So you're going to see a lot of top seeds in the playoffs. But honestly, that's what you want for this team right now. And, you may be fearful of June and you're not feeling good about today, but this is the perfect time to have a schedule like that. If the Royals were 2 games over 500, not the best time. That would be the worst time to face a schedule like this because this could push you out of the playoffs. This could bury you with a bad stretch. If the Royals have a bad stretch and they lose 12 games, still 500. I'm not saying losing 12 games is the goal here, but there's a good cushion considering they went on that 8-game winning streak. And then things soften up a little bit. They're going to see Oakland on the road. They're going to see Texas on the road. And a little bit of a spoiler here just to close out the show. We're going to be down there in Arlington watching 2 of those games, Friday and Saturday night, between the Royals and the Rangers. So our first chance to go out on the road. And also just one of a few times Locked On Royals is going to be on the road this year, doing some episodes from different cities, going to the games, giving you the insight. Should be a lot of fun. So a fun way to close out the show there. And we're very excited about what's coming up here in the next few days. But tomorrow, a series preview with Locked On Padres, not a Mailbag Friday. We're going to save that for Saturday. But as for today, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, as I just told you, we're going to break down this Royals-Padres series with Locked On Padres. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.